Welcome to another Zoom meeting and podcast of Here's Tom with the Weather, where we investigate the plethora of higher powers that populate the vast universe of 12-step recovery, where alcoholics and addicts riff out on step 3 and step 11, as prescribed by the founders of Alcoholics Anonymous, who encourage us to find some kind of higher power, as long as it's not us. We speak to people with all manner of higher powers, all kinds of takes on it, from those who are atheists, sufis, agnostics, Christians, Jews, Buddhists, followers of Islam, Hermetics, Paganists, non-dualities, the list goes on. We leave no stone unturned. It's our aim to promote understanding and open-mindedness so that alcoholics and addicts can find a higher power of their own to stay sober and carry the message. We promote tolerance and empathy for folks who might just have different spiritual practices than us. It's all about live and let live. And please remember, if you've never been here before, that this is not an AA meeting. It's just some people's version of the truth or their take on it. Sometimes we speak to seekers, to gurus, and people not necessarily in recovery. And today we're going to speak to Joe Bailey. How you doing, Joe?
I'm delighted to be here. Just what a great group of people.
Yeah, they're reasonable. They're okay. Yeah, they keep coming back. So I'm just going to give a bit of a bio about Joe, a very interesting man. Joe Bailey, or Joseph Bailey, practitioner, early pioneer, and advocate of what he's called the 3 principles of psychology. Something that he claimed removed the barriers to a spiritual awakening. Whoa! He is the author of The Serenity Principle, Finding Inner Peace and Recovery, as well as others, including his upcoming Thriving in the Eye of the Hurricane, Finding Your Innate Resilience in Our Challenging Times. In his own words, the 3 principles of psychology serve as an essential guide to a resilient life that includes happiness, connection, the ability to prevent stress and burnout, a sense of purpose, freedom for addiction, depression, and anxiety. Sign me up now. Joseph's work in the healthcare field has included cultural change consultation to hospitals and healthcare systems in Michigan and North Memorial Hospital in Minnesota, where he taught the principles of resiliency to healthcare providers at all levels. In 2002, he helped start the Inner Life of Healers program at the Center for Spirituality and Healing at the University of Minnesota School of Medicine, no less. In this pioneering program, he led seminars and retreats for doctors, nurses, and other healthcare professionals on self-care, resilience, burnout prevention, and vocational renewal. Joseph is an in-demand speaker all over the world, including the United States, UK, France, Switzerland, Spain, South Africa, India, and he speaks regularly on podcasts, just like this one, and webinars international. And say his books have been translated into 26 languages. That's a hell of a CV there, Joe. Well done, mate.
Who is that?
Who is that guy?
Who is that guy?
Come on, let's get to it, right? Let's get to it.
All right.
How do we manufacture a spiritual awakening? Tell me, because I think a lot of people in our 12-step recovery, a lot of people have struggled with it. They've had the remnants of past, whether they've past Christian basis, they've got issues with that. They can't find, and they struggle with the whole higher power concept. And I think most of us are here today. I'm going to get straight off with it. How do we manufacture a spiritual awakening?
Well, in a way, I would phrase that question a little bit differently.
Okay.
I don't think you can manufacture it. I don't think it's something that we create. It's something that we are. And what I mean by that is that I think that we, in our essence, the true essence of who we are, we're designed to realize our divine connection. That spiritual awakening is something that is built into us. And I know for much of my early recovery, I was not in drugs and alcohol. I was a recovering fixaholic. All my friends in high school were alcoholics, and I was always trying to get them to quit drinking. And I ended up, of course, in the seminary for a while to be a priest to save the world. So my addiction was to helping other people. And I thought that if I could just change other people, I would be happy. I would fill that hole inside. And so I got into clinical psychology and fell into working in addiction. But I was searching all the time. I was always doing 12-step programs, Al-Anon, you name it, different recovery programs. I was meditated, I did yoga, I did Sufism. I read every self-help book during my 20s. It was an endless search. And my life, I would have to say, improved, but I was always trying to get there. I was trying to have a spiritual awakening. I was trying to make it happen. And that was the ego. That was just my ego. And I was using the power of my mind and thought to keep me from actually experiencing that feeling. Even though at times in my life I would be out for a walk in the woods or skiing, and when my mind quieted down, I would drop into this feeling of serenity, this experience of my divine nature. And then I thought it was about skiing, or I thought it was about this or that. And so I was always looking to the outside for an inside experience. And what happened for me at age 33 was I met an enlightened person by the name of Sydney Banks, who was really the discoverer of these three principles. And I had never met an enlightened person before. I'd been around gurus and things, but this human being had a great sense of humor, much like all of you guys, and just an ordinary person, a Scottish guy from Edinburgh, who was a welder with a 9th grade education, was not a psychologist, was not a guru. He was just an ordinary guy who had an enlightenment. And the way, when Sid spoke to me the first time I heard him, it went against everything I had been struggling to try to find for that awakening. And what Sid pointed to was that we're already enlightened. We already are spiritual. You can't separate you from God, because God is ever present. It's part of the everything. And that we fall into this disguise of being a human being, and we forget who we are. We forget our true nature. And for me, the missing link, and when I heard Sid, I've been working in the addiction field for 10 years. I've been training addiction counselors. I've been working in treatment centers. I was the director of prevention in the state of Texas for alcoholism. My life was full of alcoholism, but I was missing this piece, which was that there's principles that are behind how the human experience works. And that's what he pointed me to. And it was like when he talked, I knew I was hearing something that was absolutely true, but I didn't know how to explain it. I didn't have words for it, but I felt the truth of it. When you hear truth, when you hear someone speaking from truth, you know it. You know that's true, even though I didn't understand it. But what happened for me was that I began to have moments of waking up to realizing that the thinking I was having in the moment was coming from me, not from what I was thinking about. The traffic, my ex-wife, my finances, all of my stress, I thought was coming from all of those circumstances. And what started happening for me on a dimmer switch was I gradually started waking up in the moment to seeing that I was thinking and creating my experience from the inside. And when I could see that, and you've all had those experiences all your life, sometimes through drugs and alcohol, your thinking will drop away, and you'll feel this innate essence of serenity. But when I started seeing my thinking, it removed the thinking that was getting in the way, like clouds in the way of the sun. And that for me is the simplicity of what Sid had to teach me that I had to discover for myself.
Okay. I'll get back to that question then. I'll get you to answer it later then, hey?
Okay.
You mentioned, you used a couple of words there, divine awakening and enlightenment. And you spoke about Sydney Banks. I've never met an enlightened person. Can you tell me what that means? And I've heard about a lot of people who claim to be enlightened. So what's your definition of enlightenment? That's fascinating.
Sid spoke from beyond the personal, his personal nature. He spoke, when he would speak before thought. So when he was speaking, like you're in an AA meeting sometimes, and people they might just be even new to recovery, and out of the mouths of them comes absolute truth. You can hear it, and they may not even know they're saying it themselves, but he would speak from what I would call the other principle, which is the principle of mind. Mind would be the higher power. Mind
Mhm.
would be universal consciousness. He would speak from mind rather than from his personal essence, his
So
personal.
when you say mind, you're not talking about the mind
I'm not
inside
talking about the
the
brain.
brain. You're talking about the collective consciousness, I
Yeah.
guess. Yeah.
Yeah. Mind would be more like higher power. Mind would be universal mind, the universal consciousness, that we're all in this sea of mind. We're all living in this quantum soup of mind constantly. But when we come into this world, we start to develop an ego. We start to develop an idea about life. We form concepts. This is natural. It's perfectly part of the human experience to create a personality and ego that we identify with, and we think that's who I am. Like when you were reading off my resume, it was like, who is that guy? I mean, I don't really think about myself that way, even though that's on my resume, because I never know really who I am. I'm always being created in this moment. Now, I still have a thought system, I still have beliefs and habits, but I know that's not who I am. That's who that's what's stored in my brain.
Mhm.
That's the beliefs and the concepts that I have about myself. But
Yeah.
I am who is conscious of that. And that's the second principle, consciousness. That's ability to be aware of oneself, creating an experience. Consciousness is what takes the power of thought and the power of mind and turns it into a perceptual, individual, separate reality that we all live in. Each of us lives in a different, separate reality, but we all use the same power to create it. Enlightenment is discovering the source of that. It frees us up from being bound by our past, from being unable to forgive ourselves. It keeps us from being bound by the future, the unknown, so that we're able to live in this present moment. That's why I wrote the book I'm writing right now, Thriving in the Eye of the Hurricane. Our world has gone mad. It's so full of chaos. It's so full of uncertainty, and everybody's trying to control the pandemic, the economic uncertainty, the division. And the solution to this is discovering who we actually are, who who is creating the experience. It's not coming from the TV set. It's not coming from our politicians. It's coming from us in the moment. Innocently, we're creating our own experience. And when we wake up to that, it gives us a moment of serenity and peace where our thoughts drop away and we see life in its divine perfection. We see the divine dream that we're all living in. But when we get caught up, and I get caught up every day in my personal thinking, by the way, I'm not enlightened in the sense that I'm always on a a blissful state. Just ask my wife. But
I will later.
I've got a compass, a GPS to guide me through my personal thoughts so I don't take my own thinking so personally. Does that answer
Yeah,
your question, Dave?
sure. I just you made me think there because I was really interested to see that you're a trained psychologist as well as obviously somebody who has has a conviction about spirituality. So you've kind of got a foot in the science camp and in the esoteric camp. You're sort of you've got a foot both ways. But I'm just going to if we talk more to the science guy, could it not be that a vital spiritual experience, or the so-called vital spiritual experience, could it not just be a chemical and biomechanical event whereby the spinal cords connect to the brain and we get this thing called consciousness, and it's convenient, we call it spiritual, but maybe it's a biological event that happens, and for particularly for people with addiction issues, it's part of that recovery. Do you know what I mean? So it could be like a purely scientific, it could be just a scientific event.
Well, it's totally scientific.
Mm-hmm.
The true science of psychology, if you look back at the Greek word, the root of psychology is psyche. Psyche, translated from the Greek, means mind, soul, or spirit. They're all one word, psyche, but they have those three meanings. In the development of science, in the science of psychology, and in science, per se. Theology was over here to study God, spirit. Psychology was to study the mind, more about the brain, more about the physiology and behavior, what you can see with the senses. And they left the invisible, spiritual, to the theologians. To me, what's happened with the three principles is that it's brought the spiritual and the psychological into one, and dissolved the false separation between spiritual and physical, spiritual and psychological. Mind and spirit are all one and the same thing. Everything in this world that you see, when I look out here, I'm in the woods, I see the trees and the snow here in Minnesota. Everything is made up of invisible energy, the quantum field, the quantum physicists call it. So everything is just vibrations of that energy in different levels that create the illusion of form. Thought is the same thing. When you think, David, when each of you think, and you think about a memory, let's say from the past, let's say it's a traumatic memory or painful memory, immediately that translates into a physiological, neurological, psychological, physical experience, a sensation we call a feeling, an emotion, energy in motion. The energy comes from thought. You can have that same memory and have a feeling of forgiveness. And the feeling of forgiveness is seeing that same event from a different level of consciousness that allows you to be free of the trauma of that event. So what we educate, when I work with treatment centers and I work with addicts, alcoholics, I educate them about the power of thought and the power of mind to create your moment-to-moment experience. Your experience is not coming from out there. Doesn't mean the out there doesn't exist, but your experience, you can't experience anything out there without this, without mind, without thought, and without consciousness. So those are the fundamental essence, principles, building blocks of human moment-to-moment experience. And when we wake up to that, we're freed from our past. We no longer have to be afraid of the past coming back on us. It's only a thought. And when you see it as only a thought, it doesn't have the power it has that it does when you don't know it's a thought. When it looks, it's like a nightmare. When you're having a nightmare, you don't know it's a nightmare. You're asleep. So that nightmare is like it's really happening. That alligator is biting your foot off if you're James down in Florida. But when you wake up, you really, oh, thank God it was just a dream. Well, we fall into an illusion of thought whilst awake. That is called our personal reality. And our emotions are actually the alarm clock that wakes us up to the fact that we're thinking and creating an experience. So if we feel stress or discomfort or any emotion, it's like hitting the little bumps on the side of the road so you don't go in the ditch. They warn us to don't pay, whoa, here we go. I'm having a thought experience. And so when you wake up and see that, it's like waking up from a daymare of thought. And what that does is so my life has been like a series of insights about this, thousands of insights. And I'm on the dimmer switch of enlightenment, remember.
Sure.
So every time I have an insight and I see this, it shifts my level of consciousness so I see it sooner and it lasts less long as I go on this spiritual path. And this is what I teach people in recovery, is that transformation is our design. We're designed for a spiritual awakening and for transformation. The power that elevates our consciousness is insight. And everybody's had insights their entire life. It's built into you to have insight. Insight is a new thought. It's a sight from within that allows you to see something with more clarity, whether it's who to fall in love with or what career path to follow, or whether you should stop by the grocery store and get a dozen eggs on the way home. It doesn't matter how mundane or how elevated it is. Insight is constantly guiding us. Wisdom is another word for insight.
Okay.
And 12 steps guide us to wisdom, right? That's the point.
I was just about to say that, actually. Was going to be my next point, or next question to that, is that
we're really in tune here, David. I can feel it.
Yeah. Well, to be clear, so you're not offering this as an alternative to the 12 steps. This is something to enhance the 12 steps. And is that the general experience of the people that you've worked with? Is that how it works?
My experience is that people who find the 12 steps very helpful, when they learn about the principles, it takes them much deeper into the essence of the 12 steps. So at the Recovery Church in St. Paul, for example, where I live, we have many 12-step meetings all week. We also have a couple of 3 principle support meetings. Many people go back and forth between them because they get different things from them. But the 12 steps, the 3 principles for me explains the essence of Christianity. It explains the essence. Well, I've taught this in India and to people who are Buddhists and Hindus. And they say what you're talking about is the very fundamental essence of Hinduism or Buddhism. I've taught it in Hasidic communities in London. I remember getting a call from a rabbi in Palestine once who read the Serenity Principle. And he called me in the middle of the night, and I picked up the phone, and he says, "This is Rabbi so-and-so from Palestine. I have a radio show in Palestine, and I'm a scholar of the Torah." And he says, "Do you realize that this book is writing about the essence of the Torah in modern language?" And so the principles that Sid discovered that he articulated for the world and for psychology, Sydney Banks, were the fundamental essence of all religions, all self-help movements, all psychology, anything that's ever helped, and actually everything positive and negative is fundamentally built from either the use or the misuse of these principles. We can misuse the principle of thought to create terror, to create war, to create self-degradation. That's still using the principle of thought, but it's using it without an understanding of, it looks like what's making me so angry is the news or my wife or my dog or my finances. It's not it. When your mind recognizes, when consciousness recognizes you're taking thought and putting it into that experience, and you see that, it's like after insight, you go, God, what was I thinking? I can't believe I believed that. And you have that relief. And when you have that serenity, that's when insight pops out. God grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. So you ask for serenity first, right? Because it's only in a peaceful mind that wisdom can be revealed.
Okay, so you're essentially saying that you've been painting a picture of your reality all your life, and all of a sudden you start using a different hand, or it's a different person painting that reality through your program. We're changing our reality. Well,
we're from birth to death, we're painting, our paintbrush is thought on the canvas of life. And whatever shows up is our experience. Sometimes we know that, sometimes I know I'm doing that, and sometimes I forget that I'm doing that. I go unconscious. I lose awareness. But the principles are like a compass that no matter where I love to go into the wilderness and travel backpack or canoe in the North Country. I can go anywhere if I have a map and a compass, and I won't get lost. And even though I've never been there before, I have no idea what's ahead. Because I have this guidance system. We just landed on Mars yesterday, for God's sakes.
I heard.
Oh, God.
Great result.
We can do that. For God's sake, we can figure out how to be happy. So we have this this incredible guidance system built into us, but we haven't been given the education of how to use it. And that's what Carl Jung told Bill Wilson in his letter to him. And he said that he recognized Bill Wilson's spiritual awakening. And he said that the only way that that happens is through religion, close connection with people who love you, or through an education of the mind beyond the confines of mere rationalism. And that's the essence of what the three principles is. It's the education of the mind beyond just intellectual understanding.
Okay. That's
the confines of the mind. It's an insightful understanding of the mind. Because I can, a parrot can say mind, thought, and consciousness. And a lot of our clients, when they're going through treatment, oh yeah, mind, thought, and consciousness, they have no idea what they're talking about until they have a realization, an insight. And then it comes alive. It's not a concept anymore, it's a knowing. It's an absolute knowing. And you can't erase a knowing. You can erase a thought or a concept, but you can't erase knowing. Once you know how to ride a bike, you can't forget how to ride the bike. Once you know who you are inside is absolutely whole, complete, and enough. And even though you might have daymares and forget it, inside you know you're okay. I know, like Bill W. said in his awakening, I'll just quote here, he said, savoring my new world, I remained in this state for a long time. I seemed to be possessed by the absolute and the curious conviction that deepened no matter how wrong things seemed to be. There could be no question of the ultimate rightness of God's universe. For the first time, I really felt I belonged. I knew I was loved and I could love in return. I thanked my God who had given me a glimpse of his absolute self. Even though a pilgrim upon an uncertain highway, I need be concerned no more, for I had glimpsed the great beyond. So that, to me, that's, once you have an experience of who you are, that's home. And when you don't have that, you look outside through drugs, sex, gambling, alcohol, money, power, the list goes on endlessly. And you can be sober and not know who you are, and you keep searching. But once you found what you're looking for, you have that compass. You've got your bearings back. What I love about 12-step, I meet some of the wisest people I've ever met were in AA. The first guy that helped me understand, I was a young psychologist, just out of grad school, and I was working at a mental health center, and I was put in charge of the heroin program and the alcoholism program. I said, I don't know anything about that. I didn't get any courses on that. And the director said, well, none of us have either. You're it. And so there was a guy there named Bud, who was an ex-Marine. I was a conscientious objector in the Vietnam War. I'm a deputy guy. And Bud was a Marine who just got back from Vietnam a few years before. Big neck and crew cut, and here I am with long hair. And Bud helped me. He was the most joyful, serene person I had ever met in my life. And I want what he's having. Because all the psychiatrists and psychologists and social workers were dreary and intellectually and screwed up and insecure, but Bud had serenity. And I thought he could teach the rest of us about mental health. He had something, and that's what got me into the addiction field professionally. I fell in love with that feeling that I was drawn to in people who had discovered who they were.
Okay. Just want to just to maybe try and get you to answer that first question in a different way, is just want you to imagine that you've got a new client come in. His name's James Lebowski. He's an agnostic stroke atheist. He wants to have he wants to have some kind of awakening. He rocks up to your door with his suitcases and he knocks on the door and he wants, what's day one for James going to be like? How do we start with James? What do we do to get him on this path?
Well, the first thing I do,
Don't bang him on the head. Just be nice to him.
I have a little button. Can you see
I
that?
saw that.
I got this
Great.
when I was working with one of the hospitals. My colleague Mavis Carr and I, we would train the staff in the principles and resilience, and a lot of what we talked about was listening. And I also play Santa Claus every year, and I have a Santa Claus outfit. So I went over to the hospital, and I had a big white sack full of these buttons. And I just found this the other day in the closet to listen. But the first thing I do is I listen to my client. I get to know them. There's something about deeply listening to my clients that draws out their wisdom. They start hearing themselves tell their story, and they begin to have insight, because, as I used to say, I had a sign in my office that said, everybody just needs a good listening to. Because when people are genuinely listened to, as happens often in 12-step meetings, people tell their story and they're heard, sometimes, but without judgment, without criticism, without trying to fix. Just hearing that story is very powerful. Every time you tell your story, you see it a little deeper. So what I'm pointing people back to is the source of their own wisdom. So I tell them first, the first thing I tell people is, you're already complete. You're not broken. You're not damaged goods. I don't care what you've been through, how many times you've had a near-death experience. That part of you that is still alive and here is complete and whole, and it's divine. There's nothing wrong with you in your essence. So there's nothing for me to fix. Step one. Step two, the only thing that's in the way of you realizing that is your misuse of mind, misuse of thought, the misuse of consciousness, innocently. And so then I teach them about the mechanics of mind, thought, and consciousness, what those principles are. And it's very simple. And a lot of times I tell them through stories. I don't tell them in an academic way. I tell them through story, through metaphor. And every now and then when I'm talking to them, I can see they've had an insight. When someone's all caught up in their thinking, they look like that, kind of. And when they have an insight, they light up. I say, that's it. That's what you're looking for. That's it. And I put a frame around that, and that's what our entire treatment is about. It's not about tearing down defenses. It's about helping people see who they really already are. So we don't get any resistance from clients. People don't.
The people that come there already they're on the way. They want to have this experience. They want to enhance this.
Not necessarily.
No. Okay.
There are many people that are court ordered, or we work with people in prisons in the UK. There's lots of people in the UK that work with people.
Certainly, a lot of people in the UK in prison. That's for sure.
Yeah. And they have a really good program based on the 3 principles called Beyond Recovery that's in many prisons in the UK. And they what draws people in is they see someone who was a real asshole before, pardon my French, or a jerk or a really miserable person. Their light comes back on, and they see that and they get curious. What happened? What drug are they on? And serenity draws people in like Bud drew me in.
Okay.
And so a lot of what happens in the treatment center is that people see people who are a little further along in their realization of this, that gives them a sense of hope. Hope is what opens the door to the mind to listen.
So there's a testimonial aspect to it of people who are further along. They see that this is working, and by power of demonstration.
Right.
Okay. Fantastic.
Yeah. So that's how we pass it on. The book Pass It On about the history of AA is all about that. We pass it on through our own step work, through our own relationship with other people who are wanting help. So that feeling of love and compassion, and being an example of not perfection, but of a certain amount of serenity or peace of mind that you've achieved gives others a sense of possibility that maybe I too can have. And then when you tell your story, this is where I was and this is how I feel now, it gives credibility. So there must be something there. So the way that we teach this, we in our treatment centers, we thoroughly detox people, we treat them medically, we get their nutrition balance, we balance their brain, we treat the body, we teach them meditation and yoga and lots of things like that. But the core, the foundation of what everything, like the hub and the spokes of the wheel, is the three principles. So that's what everything is kind of. This is how three principles looks like in meditation, in qigong practice, in mindfulness. So we show people the fundamental building blocks of how everything that has ever helped human beings works.
Okay.
That's why they're called principles. They're universal. They're and Sid Bill W. Read Varieties of Religious Experience by William James. And James once said that if psychology ever found its principles, and it had not yet, it would then become a science. This was in the 1890s. And I think Sydney Banks, not a psychologist, a welder, discovered psychology's principles. And that is advancing. Like, I've worked at the Mayo Clinic, taught their physicians this. I've worked in industry, I've worked in education, I've worked in every field, I've worked all over the world teaching these principles, and everyone goes, wow, why didn't anybody tell me this sooner? This is so simple. We teach it to kindergarten students. We have whole curriculums, K through 6, through college, to teach the principles, but in a way that kids can understand. So the creativity, how this is being taught all over the world, including addiction, prevention, treatment, and aftercare, it comes out differently with everyone because we're all this creative intelligence. It's like what you guys are doing. This is amazing what you guys are doing with this Zoom call meeting that you have. You're helping so many people. And I listened to you in the beginning and the energy, the humor, the connection that you have. It's just, that's love. It's all about love, really. In the bottom line is love and understanding.
Great. I thank you very much for that. Thanks for saying so. So I'm just going to remind everyone who's here with us to, if you've got a question for Joe, put it in chat and send it to the host, and I'll ask it for you, if that's okay. Already we've got a few questions there, and I just wanted to ask you one thing, and this is just kind of a side issue, and it's something that that I'm sort of exploring myself at the moment, with regards to the cause of addiction. And I know it's one of those things where we sort of say we don't need to know, but there's kind of two schools of thought, isn't it? That we inherit addiction and alcoholism. There's something in our DNA, and then there's also childhood trauma. What's your professional opinion on that? Where do you think that? Where does that arrive? How do we become addicts? I'm just an innocent question just to ask you so.
Well, I think there are multiple causes. I think genetic predisposition. I just did an intervention yesterday on an alcoholic woman, and everyone in her family's an alcoholic. I mean, it's just like it's everywhere,
Sure.
And I've also worked with her nephew who is a alcoholic. So there is that. Those are kind of predisposing factors. They're not causative, but they're like a predisposition. Like, I have a genetic predisposition for anxiety. I come from a family of worriers. They all worried. Anyone who got pulled too tight had anxiety. I had panic attacks. So that was my weak link in my chain. So the way I think of the genetic predisposition is like links in a chain. And if you pull that chain taut enough, it's going to break wherever it's weakest. So it might be an alcoholism link. It might be a psychotic link. It might be schizophrenia, for depression, for anxiety. But when the chain is loose, when the mind is at peace, the predispositions don't have the same effect. They're not predeterminative. They're just, it's like the immune system, only psychological. We have a physical immune system that when it's in high gear, we ward off the flu and colds, or other people don't. They get sick. If you get really stressed out, that's when you get sick. So there's a relationship between the immune system. Psychological immunity, we would call resilience. That's what I call is resilience. The more resilient we are, the more we can experience trauma, but not be adversely affected by it. So I don't, it's not a, to me, I don't get into those arguments. It's not, well, what is it really physical, or is it this? It's physical, it's spiritual, it's genetic, but to me, the most important causative is how do you keep the chain loose? How do you keep in a state of mental health or resilience so that you're not at the adverse effect of your past traumas or your past genetics? Like when I work with trauma victims, if things trigger their trauma, they'll have a real strong traumatic re-experiencing of the past event. But after an understanding of the principles, they'll have the same thoughts go through their mind. They have a gentler physical reaction, or maybe even an intense one, but with an awareness that it's not the past that's giving me this experience. It's my thinking in this moment and how I'm using it that's giving me this experience. And what happens with that, it's like if the pot is boiling and you see that, you turn the flame down, the boiling goes away. So the more understanding you have, the more you develop an immunity or a protection from your own past traumas, past history, past tendencies or habits. So this is it's strengthening our psychological, spiritual immune system. It doesn't mean you're perfect. It just means that you're more resilient. You bounce back more quickly. You don't go as deep. You avoid things that you would have hit head on before you hit them.
Thank you very much. So a few questions here in chat. Joe S asks, Joe, who's in Brisbane in Australia, asks, so it's as simple as stopping all thought?
It's not really stopping thought. You can't stop thinking until you die. Maybe you just don't stop then. You can't stop thought, but you can be aware that you're thinking. If you try to control your thinking, it usually gets worse, in my experience. When I was an adolescent Catholic young boy, I tried not to think about sex, especially when I was in the seminary. Think about it. Didn't work very well.
No.
But when you accept that you're just having a thought experience, you see it as that, it loses its juice.
Okay.
Sure. I hope that answered the question.
I think that's very good. It's very non-duality. It's good. Now we've got our friend Frank Z, who's a Zen master in Northern Ireland. A very good friend of mine, actually, is Frank. And he asks, he's got a question for you. So his Zen question is, can you remember what your face was like before your parents were born? Good on you, Frank.
Man, that's one of those Zen cones that I've never been able to figure out.
Yeah.
No,
sorry. That's okay. But Frank, I'm sure Frank will, he probably has an answer as well. So Frank will probably hang around after if you want to ask him yourself. Now, another audience member, a Virginia hippie cat, asked, do you adhere to EMDR?
I don't. I've never been trained in EMDR. That came along after I got out of grad school, and I learned the 3 principles when I was 33. So I've been practicing with the 3 principles, and I find that it has the same effect. Now, there are treatment centers that use EMDR with the three principles, with people who may have had, they just don't seem to be responding without it. So I'm not against anything that works. You know, I'm like a truth vampire. You know, I'll suck it wherever I can get it. You know,
Yeah.
so I see that what's underneath everything that's ever worked is the truth of how things work, whether that's through Zen Buddhism, through my, you know, I do study Qigong and Qigong healing and Kung Fu. I find them very compatible with the three principles. I'm a Christian. I find it extremely compatible with Christianity. I'm also a Buddhist. I mean, I don't really belong to any religion.
Sure.
I see the divine in all of it. So I think, you know, I think some people need more of a somatic or physical experience to help heal with trauma at times. But I find that what I do with my clients is I help them to respect and listen to their own inner guidance of insight to be guided to what would be helpful to them. For my Native American clients, they do a sweat. You know, they go on a solo trip to the mountains, you know, and they have an experience. So each of us will be guided by our own culture, by our own beliefs to go to what is going to be helpful for you in this moment. So this is a psychology of description of how it works rather than a prescription of what you should do. I don't tell people what to do. I tell people how to listen to themselves, because everyone's going to be guided in a very unique, insightful way to what their next step is in life.
Okay. And just on that, just to anyone who doesn't know what EMDR is eye movement desensitization and reprocessing. It's a psychotherapy that enables people to heal from symptoms and emotional distress. It's a phased, focused approach to treating traumatic and other symptoms by reconnecting clients in a safe and measured way to images, self-thoughts, emotions, and brain sensations. Aren't you impressed that I knew all that? I just looked at that.
That was all right off the top of your head, David. I'm really impressed.
Photographic memory, you see. Yeah.
Well, I don't have one of those, so
look into my eyes. Look into my eyes.
And I have some of that from you.
Smokes and mirrors. Yeah. So, next question. Got a question from our much loved co-panelist here, Kaiser, who's a fellow Minnesotan, if that's the right way of saying it. Kaiser's got a question for you. Over to you, Kaiser.
Hey, Joseph. Hey, everybody. Kaiser. My question to you is: you're using three principles, and I want to be able to digest those principles. And my understanding is really harnessed to the 12 steps. It sounds similar to what I do, but I'm having trouble translating that. Are these three principles explicitly in the 12 steps? And if they are, could you help us translate where they are in the 12 steps? Maybe they're not. Just curious.
Well, I think they're woven throughout the 12 steps. When I read the literature in 12 steps, I see the principles everywhere, but I also see it everywhere in the Bible. Sure. I also see it, you know, so you're in St. Paul. You know, one thing you could do, there is a three principles support group at the Recovery Church on Saturday. You might be helpful to go to that because a lot of the people there also go to 12 step. And it might be useful to you to talk to Ned, who runs that group. But I don't know if that addressed your question or not.
Not quite.
Okay.
If they're embedded in the 12 steps, where it's like you're using language that I am trying to access, and it's not translating. Specifically, I have a sense to it. But it's a little fuzzy.
You know, you can remind me of myself when I first heard Sid. I ran everything he was saying through what I already knew that had helped me through my psychological theories, through other things. And if you try to understand this with your intellect, if you run it through the filter of that, you won't get an insight, because as long as the intellect is engaged, the heart doesn't open. And so the first thing I had to learn was to quit trying to figure it out, quit trying to put it into something, to blend it with what I knew, to try to understand it with what I already thought. And I was a little insulted at first when I heard that. I thought, well, I'm really good at what I do. I really have a lot of knowledge here, but they said, just listen for a feeling and listen for an insight. And as I began to have insights, which meant it wasn't intellectual understanding, I had an experience of feeling the thoughts drop away. I had an experience of this release of all this tension I had in my body. I had this experience of feeling unaffected by things that would normally really bother me. It's almost like I could feel that in hindsight, everything I was reacting to was coming from my own mind. So once I began to see that, I started to understand the principles experientially rather than intellectually. After I really got a deeper grounding in them, and I went back to my 12-step books and understanding, it was like, oh my God, this is everywhere in these books. It's here, it's everywhere, it's everywhere. Everything. But I could see the fundamental, it's almost like the great unification theory. It unified all of the infinite ways that wisdom has been found and spiritual enlightenment has been found throughout time. It shows the before form part of that, the invisible ingredients behind the 12 steps, behind Buddhism, behind Christianity, behind unconditional love. It showed how, kind of like in the evolution of physics, we saw things in classical physics first, then we began to, as the science of physics evolved, we got to a more fundamental, almost spiritual level when we got to the quantum physics level. So
I'm starting to feel that. That's very helpful. I appreciate that.
Good.
It is beyond the ideas. I really appreciate you indulging me. Thank you.
You're very welcome. And you're right down the street. We can talk anytime.
Oh, coffee time, Kaiser. Yeah, thanks very much. Cheers, Kaiser. Lovely to hear from you. So just before we go to the next question, just quickly, could you just restate the 3 Ps for us, please?
Mind, thought, and consciousness. So mind is the universal intelligence of all things, the higher power, God, the divine essence. Thought, it's not what we think, but that we think. It's the power to think. And the power to think is how we create our unique psychological reality that we all live in. Consciousness is the third principle, the power, the invisible power that brings thought to life through the senses, the feelings, and the perceptions into a experience we call my reality. So those 3 principles are the building blocks of every moment-to-moment experience we ever have, from birth to death. Even before we have a language, we're experiencing thought. Thought can be in music. It's not language only.
Thank you very much. So we're into the sort of the final straight now. So we've got a few questions to go through. So now David M, and I've lost your question there, David. Where is it here? It was a really good question, and I'm losing it. Here we go. Where is it? It's is there a hierarchy to the mind, thought, and consciousness? For instance, you can't have a thought without a mind, and so the mind is more fundamental than thought. Or are all 3 symbiotic and rely on equal values to reach an equilibrium and create a spiritual experience?
There are really 3 aspects of the same thing. There's just one principle.
Okay.
With 3 aspects. It's like when I was studying theology, we studied about the Trinity: God the Father, God the Son, God the Holy Spirit. It's all one God. There's only one God with three aspects. Its mind is the essential principle. But to talk about it and to express it and to explain it, we talk about it in those three aspects.
Okay.
The creation principle, it's the human creation principle.
Okay. Thank you very much. Kevin P, who I haven't seen in a while, good to see you, Kevin, says or asks, the big book tells us that God is deep inside all of us, and that's in the appendix 2, page 55. Do you agree with this, Joe?
He's everywhere. He's everywhere.
He's everywhere. Wonderful. Right. So Debbie in Minnesota says, I was a student of yours 30 years ago. That's a long time ago. It was life-changing. How do I get the curriculum to teach this to my students? Or maybe it was 25 years ago. I think she's trying to be nice to you there, saying, you know, you're not that old. Yeah.
Debbie, is she a teacher?
I'm not sure.
There's many, if she said, I'm a teacher, I want to teach these principles, there's all kinds of curriculums. This is just one called My Guide Inside. This is for kindergarten through eighth grade. It's available all over the world. It's online. It's very inexpensive, almost nothing. So there's lots of curriculums available, and there's in my new book, I'll have a resource section that I write about three different curriculums. There's more than that, but the one in the UK is called iHeart. It's based in London. If you look up iHeart London, they have fabulous training programs for teachers. There's also a program called the Spark Initiative. It's the Spark Inside. It's out of Florida. And they're also all over the world. They're in all different languages. And so you go on my website, you'll find resources, which is Joe Bailey at Joe Bailey and or Joe at, wait a minute, my website, joebaileyhandassociates.com. There's a link to it on that you have, right, David?
Yes, it's all in chat. We're going to put it on again. So Thanks very much for that. That was a great question, Debbie. Good to see you here. Now, Lebowski, James has got a quick question for you.
Oh, it's not a quick question. It's going to take about 30 minutes.
Oh. I'm going to get the hook.
That's just the question.
Yeah. So it's just, this is part one of an 18-part question.
Oh, good.
No, you had an experience with Lyme's disease. I know that, and I just thought it was a really interesting experience because it was one of those things where you were talking about how you were in a situation where you required somebody else to point out what you are normally pointing out for others.
Yeah.
And I was just, I thought that it was a great story about how this works.
Yeah.
Thanks, James.
I have that whole story on a video on my website. People want more detail, but I'll answer it just briefly that, yeah, I'd been teaching the principles for 30 some years, and I got severe chronic neurological Lyme disease. And I thought I was dying. I didn't know if I had cancer or what, but I was in extreme pain, had no energy. I couldn't think, was trying to write a book. I just couldn't function. And after about 3 months, I was diagnosed with Lyme disease. And the doctor said it was the worst case he'd ever seen. So I took lots of treatments and I got better, but I was still not myself. And my wife and I went to Malaysia to attend a Qigong training from a grandmaster. And one of the other sufis, which is teacher in Chinese medicine, he was a very gifted healer from Switzerland. And so I wanted to get a session with him while I was there. So we were going to lunch one day in between classes, and I caught up with him in the group walking through Chinatown in Penang, Malaysia. Mm-hmm. And I said, Andrew, can I get a session with you? And he said, yeah, sure. I said, when? And he says, let's just do it now. I said, now? We're on our way to lunch. We're walking through this horns honking and everything. He says, yeah, now. I said, oh, okay. He says, so what's the problem? He said, oh, well, Joe, I said, well, I got Lyme's disease last summer. And he says, well, stop right there. I said, well, that's just the beginning of the story. He said, just stop there. Don't ever, ever say you have Lyme disease again. I said, what do you mean? I didn't even know I had it for 3 months until I realized that's what it was. And he says, every time you say that, you have an encyclopedia of information about what you believe that means. And you're sending that signal through every quantum cell in your body. And I said, oh yeah, I know that. I've written several books about that. And he looked at me and he just said, no, you don't. And I was kind of insulted. And he says, no, you don't. I said, well, how do you know that? And he says, I can see it in your face. I said, well, what do you mean? He says, you didn't understand it. He went on about quantum physics and going, talking and talking, but he's like a Zen master. He was just like, boom, would not let me move an inch. And he asked me again, he says, do you believe me now? And I said, yeah, it really makes a lot of sense. No, you don't, he said. And I said, what do you mean I don't know? How do you know? He says, I can see it in your face. You don't know. You think you know. You believe you know. You have words for it, but you don't know what I'm saying. And it hit me like a ton of bricks. And I realized, shit. I could see all the thinking I was doing constantly about my illness, my fear of death, all of this was invisible to me. A teacher of the three principles, it was completely invisible to me. And my brain just melted, and it kind of, the whole thing came crashing down. And he just looked at me, he says, now you believe me. And I hadn't said a word.
Yeah.
I said, how do you know? And he says, I can see it in your face. So the next morning I woke up and all my symptoms were completely gone.
Wow.
Overnight. It was like a miracle. It was amazing. Because in that moment, I saw mind. I saw it as an insight at a deeper level than I'd ever seen it. So when we have slips, like I did, it's the divine design to go deeper into our understanding and our wisdom. And that's why this is an ongoing evolutionary spiritual awakening. There's no end to it.
Okay. And that video is available on your website. Did you say it's documented?
Yeah, you put it on my website or on
okay.
my professional Facebook page. It's listed there.
Brilliant. Okay, moving right along because we've got quite a few questions. I'm going to try to get through it. So countdown's on. So David Roberts,
as fast as I can.
That's David Roberts asks or says, people are forgetful. For example, you can wander away from the 12 steps and go back to your addiction. How do you help people to not forget the three principles after they've had an insight?
Well, two answers to that. One is, the good news is we have a part of our divine design is that we have built into us feelings that let us know when we're off track. Because when you are in clarity, when you understand, when you see things insightfully, you feel a sense of peace. You feel a sense of knowing. You feel serenity. And when you're caught up in your ego again, you're going to feel more and more miserable, whether it's arrogance or insecurity or anxiety or depression. Your feelings are your built-in guidance system to let you know when you're going off track. The feelings don't lie. Feelings are a printout of thought. And so the way we're misusing thought, it's like we have a fire sensor in our house, just like you probably do all over wherever you are.
Mm-hmm.
And if there's smoke that you can't see or carbon monoxide, that buzzer will go off. Well, your body has sensations with buzzers that blow off when you get caught up in your ego. But you have to wear your little listening button. But I do encourage people to continue, learning, being open.
It's an ongoing process.
It's an ongoing process of prayer and meditation, and just discovering everything that you can. And when you get caught up, you ask for help.
Sure. Okay, thanks very much. Now, this is an interesting question from Jackie. Jackie, who's in the audience, says the following. It's a bitter pill for victims of trauma to swallow that they have created their own reality. For example, Jackie, I take it, works with women who have fled violent men. To infer that their circumstances are somehow their own fault or projection is pretty damning. How do you apply the principles of thought without inflicting more damage?
Well, I would never say that they created their own trauma, their own infliction of rape or whatever they went through. I wouldn't say that. What I would say is that human beings, because we have the power of consciousness and thought and mind, we have the power to heal from that. And so like when I work with people who have trauma, the more that they can see the trauma experience they're having now is not coming from the past, but from their memory of the past. And that memory is thought in the moment. It's the power of thought in the moment. And just like a nightmare, when you're in it and you're not aware that it's a nightmare, it is re-traumatizing. But when you have awareness that it's right now, it did happen, I'm not denying it, it did happen, but right now I'm bringing that past into this moment with the power of my mind and thought. And that's innocent. It's totally innocent. It's totally part of humanness. But with insight and awareness, that will cleanse that. I remember working with a woman who was an incest victim, and she was an alcoholic and well involved in AA and everything. But as she was learning the principles, she started having traumatic nightmares at night about her rape at age 10 from her uncle. And she came in with, I'm just really shaking. I feel like I'm going backwards. And I said, no, this is a beautiful thing. This is, you're at a level of mental health where you can experience those memories now so that you can heal from it. So when an old memory comes back and you have an understanding of it as thought in the moment, it allows you to go through that experience to feel it, and it can be painful, but you actually have an opportunity to heal with the power of mind and the power of your own insight and wisdom, so that every time you go through that flashback, you peel another layer off, that there's an evolution, so that you're not going to be a victim of this the rest of your life. You have the power to heal completely. You'll never change the memory because the past doesn't exist. The future doesn't exist. The only thing that exists is right now. And right now is brought to you in living color by mind, thought, and consciousness.
Okay. All right. Thanks for that, Jackie. Now, Marty T, this is a good question as well. What is the source of thoughts?
Mind. Now, personal thought, there's original thought.
Mm-hmm.
Original thought is divine thought. Every baby comes into the world with original thought. Then we have a computer mind, the brain, that stores thought, experiences. And so we can have a thought that comes from brain that consciousness and mind turn into a perception, turn into an experience. So a redundant thought, a habitual thought, has a very different feeling to it than a divine thought, than an original thought. An original thought settles the mind. This is the secret of serenity. When you see how mind actually works, it allows you to still have all the memories you've ever had, but you have a psychological immunity to those memories. And the more wisdom you gather, the more consciousness you accrue, the more immunity you have to your painful thoughts and memories that have been destructive. The reason that I wanted to bring the three principles to the addiction field, when I was working in that field before I knew the principles, we had a tremendous problem with relapse and transfer of addiction. So then we developed another program for people with multiple addictions, with drugs and alcohol. And then we'd have another one specifically for heroin. Then we have another one for sexual addiction, another one for gambling, another one for overeating, another one for this. And we didn't see that the common denominator of all of them was the same thing. And if you didn't have that spiritual transformation, you didn't have that awakening of the mind through an education of the mind beyond the confines of mere rationalism, then you would have a tendency to transfer addictions or relapse into the same addiction. So this is primary prevention. When I was the director of primary prevention, boy, I wish I knew the principles. So all I had to do, had people doing, was Sufi dancing and sweat lodges, techniques. I didn't know how it worked. So all you can do when you don't know how it works is you just do techniques, and they all work temporarily. They don't always work, because that's not what's really working. It's what's behind it that's working. Mind is what does the working.
Okay.
Well, you guys I thought you guys were going to be a really good group. I had all this, I was so excited about speaking to you guys. There's such an openness and an energy to people in recovery. That's why I keep coming back to, I work in lots of different fields, but my favorite group, you're my peeps, man. You're my peeps.
Well, come back. We're here every Friday. And speaking of which, next Friday we've got Todd Deviney, who wrote the book Expansion for Ascending Consciousness. And that's going to be a real treat. I know Anne Kay's particularly excited about this one. So yeah, go and have a look at Todd Deviney. It's in the chat there as well. So a couple more questions, and let's get to the biggie. Just I'm interested just quickly on you trained to be a priest, as you said. Why did you leave that, and did that affect your own personal concept of a higher power or God?
Well, I went into the priesthood. When I was in high school, I had an aunt who was a Catholic missionary in Guatemala, and she invited me to live with a family there. And so when I was 16, I traveled with her through the villages in Guatemala with the poor and her work, and with many other priests and nuns. And it was quite an awakening for a 16-year-old kid who was raised in a very protected environment. The country was in a state of war, and I knew from that day on I was going to be of service to helping alleviate suffering in the world. That's what I wanted to do. I found my vocation. So I went into seminary when I got out of high school, and I got to work with Martin Luther King's organization in Chicago. It was an amazing kind of a social justice seminary experience. But I knew I didn't want to be a priest within just a couple of months. I knew this wasn't for me, but I wanted to help people.
What was it about the priesthood that didn't appeal? Can you just elaborate a little bit more
the
on that?
celibacy.
Oh, okay.
Well, it was
fair enough.
That's the short answer. But really, there was so much division and confusion after Vatican II that the church was in great turmoil, and I just saw so much hypocrisy, and I thought there's got to be a better way to help people. So many people were so messed up themselves that were teaching us that they didn't have their own psychological, spiritual bearings. There were some that were very spiritual and really amazing, but I just thought that's how, and you grow up Catholic, if you want to help people, you become a priest, if you're a guy or a brother. So that's why it was cultural more than anything. And then I got into psychology, and I thought, where's the spirituality in this? There's no spirituality. It was always missing. And so the three principles kind of brought the two together.
Okay. And you said that I'm interested to know, you're a Christian, or I'm assuming you're a Christian. I think you said that you believe in you're with Jesus Christ, etc. Is that the case?
No, I don't really identify as any religion. Culturally, I'm Catholic. I was raised Catholic.
Sure.
When I go to church, I go to Catholic church, but I go to synagogue. I've gone to sweats. I find God everywhere in all religions, and I learned from each religion has a different. So I think you can't put a shark in a bathtub.
Good one.
You
Yeah.
can't put God in a set of beliefs. Beliefs are helpful. I'm not knocking religion. Religion's a wonderful thing, but to confine it to a certain set of beliefs to me is confining. I see God in everything. I see a God in science. I think.
You know, going back to that original, you talked about, you used the word divine. So is God a supernatural presence that's here to do good on earth? I mean, I'm just trying to get your concept of what everyone's concept is different. There's nuances here and there, and some are totally different. I'm interested to know what your concept of God is. Shark in the bathtub wise.
I guess God is love. I remember a friend of mine did a seminar with ministers and priests and rabbis of all different religions. And she said to the group, she said, if you asked children from every religion to draw what God looks like, they would all have a different image. But if you asked all of those children, what's the feeling of God, they would all say love. So for me, God is love. God is that, and that love is not just personal love, that's a bigger love. But God is the essence of all things. There is nothing that isn't God. The whole universe is God. It's the organizing principle behind everything. So in the human form, it's a divine energy of who we are. Watched a special on hummingbirds last night and how they've evolved, and what an amazing creature that is, that heart beats 4,000 beats a minute without exploding, you know, and then close down to 40 beats a minute at night so it doesn't starve to death at night. So the intelligence of God is in all of nature, all of the universe, in all of us.
So there's a divine plan. There's a divine agenda. There is and like you said, the word intelligence. There is a plan.
For me, the plan is that we're all here to discover who we are. It's the big game of hide and go seek. We're hidden in our ego, and we're seeking who we really are, which is God.
Okay. Good answer. Okay. So we'll just come to the end. Final question, as we always do, and a little bit of fun for you. So book sales have gone through the roof. In fact, you've appeared on Oprah Winfrey, and you're selling 1 million books a day. It's fantastic. You've become mega rich overnight, and you decide, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to take a couple of years off. I'm going to buy a mega yacht, and I'm going to set sail from somewhere not near Minnesota, but on the coast, you know, from Washington State somewhere, and you set sail on this mega yacht. You've got all your possessions, all your favorite books, your family, everything's in there. You're going to live on this fantastic super yacht, and you're into the South Pacific, heading towards sunny climes, off the coast of Fiji, no less. You hit a submerged reef. There's a huge rip in the side of the boat, and it starts to sink, and in seconds you're going to go under with this boat. So all you've got time is to get your family overboard, grab a plastic bag, and grab your favorite book from a bookcase, put it in the plastic bag, dive overboard, swim with the family to the deserted island, and await rescue. And you'll be there for a few weeks where you've got to read this book. What's the book? Who's it by? And why did you save it?
Oh, what a great setup. Immediately the thought that came to my mind was a book I've got right here.
Oh.
Called The Missing Link by Sydney Banks.
Can you hold it up, please, to the front? Can you hold it right up to us? The Missing Link. Reflections on Philosophy, and I can't read that last bit.
And Spirit.
Oh, okay. By Sydney Banks, and that's SIDNEY Banks.
Yeah, and you can go to sydneybanks.org, and all of his videos, recordings are free, available to anybody. And all of his writings and things, you know, he's written lots of books. He was a very simple 9th grade education guy, but his stories were all parables in a way. Second Chance was the first book he wrote. It's just a wonderful book. But this is kind of his greatest hits. This is kind of the summary book for Sid. That would be the book. That's the book I always fall back on when I get lost. But and his I loved it. I was telling you, I got to travel in Ireland for 10 days with Sid and his wife, and it was such an amazing experience to be with him, because being with an enlightened person, he's just so ordinary, and he had his own moods and go up and down everything, but he was so time was different when you're around Sid. It was like it completely slowed down, and because Sid was so mystical. He had a mystical feeling about him. He was so present that he would, just being around him, you would drop into the moment in a deeper way than I'd ever been able to. So that taught me more than any of his books, was just his presence. Was very, very mindful.
Terrific. I love it when our guests have a book just to the right of them and they pull it off and they bring it out. So we've had that. So thank you very, very much. And I just want to say, I want to thank my team. I want to thank Anne Kay for all the work that she's done behind the scenes, as she always does every week. Same with Kaiser and with James with the Lebowski. So thank you very much. And to Anne H, or Anne Hofferberth, who's here as well. Thank you very much for organizing this. And finally, Joe, thank you so much, mate. It's been fantastic. Thank you so much. Really was. I think I enjoyed this more than anything I've given in a long time. This was really, I could feel it before it happened. I just felt so excited about seeing you guys. You're just awesome. I'd love to come back anytime. My pleasure. Come back anytime. Every week we've always got fantastic guests. So thanks, James, for being the link, the missing link. Well, that's certainly true of Lebowski. I couldn't ask for a better description. Thank you very much. We're going to hang around afterwards. I'm going to stop recording. Thank you very much for a bit of a quick Q&A. I'm sure other people want to talk to you. So with that, see you all next week.